One of the most important questions you should ask for your business is how much are you charging? How do you define the pricing of your services? And today, this is exactly what we're going to talk about with the best person that I know of that could talk about pricing, and this is Casey Brown from Boost Pricing. Enjoy my conversation with Casey. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. So today we're going to talk about pricing. And I think it's probably the first time that I'm having a full episode, a full podcast on pricing. And the reason is that I haven't found yet the right person until today, that is. Casey Brown is the founder of Boost Pricing. She's worked in corporate America with General Electric, with AkzoNobel. We're going to talk about it, that she's an entrepreneur and she is a professional speaker, and she's got a TEDx talk that has been seen for over 5 million times now. And it's all about pricing. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Casey Brown.
Thank you, Eric. I'm so happy to be with you today.
I am too. And thanks to Ryan Tansom, we were able to meet and know each other. And
Yes.
everything you're doing about pricing, I'm learning a lot every time you're speaking, every time I'm reading something about you. But before we get into that, I'm very curious about your journey, and also your journey going from corporate America, where you have 1,500 people around you and a team that can do everything and anything, to starting your own business. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. Well, unlike many entrepreneurs, this wasn't the obvious path for me. I never, it's not like growing up, I was one of those people that started, had the paper route and was selling, lemonade stand or anything. I didn't really have this sort of classical entrepreneurial roots at all. I wanted to just get a good education, get a good job. That looked like a good plan to me. I grew up in below the poverty line. So to me, a stable corporate job was like the best thing I could hope for. And I was really excited to start my career at GE, as you mentioned, and then went on to work at AXO. And I started as an engineer, and I really liked that. I love data and systems and analytics and understanding how things work. And so all of the early years of my career were great. What I started to notice the longer I was in corporate America is some sort of organizational dysfunction. And I don't want to point to that at those particular companies. I think it's really, I got interested when I did my MBA in organizational development and organizational behavior, and the idea that it becomes harder as you grow a system of people to keep everyone aligned on the same goals and make sure everyone's armed and equipped and motivated to row in the same direction. And so the longer I went through my career, the more it became clear to me that there were challenges to making a very large organization very effective. And I was part of teams and initiatives that I didn't necessarily agree with the direction we were taking. I would speak up. And so, like, just long story short, I thought to myself, I'm working really hard to add, a thousandth of a penny to a share price for people I've never met. Like, it wasn't motivating to me anymore. I started to get frustrated with some of the bureaucratic things that I was kind of around and experiencing. And by that point, I had moved out of engineering into pricing and had really dove into this area. And we can talk about that too. But I'd gotten very interested in the pricing space and saw how it was being rolled out and used in big companies. And I thought I could maybe bring that expertise down market a little bit and maybe reach some small and medium-sized companies in that sort of mid-market space with what I had learned in these big companies about pricing excellence. And so I started to think about this. The one other thing I'll share that's relevant to the journey is I have an older brother who's also an engineer, actually. And he started a company before I did. And I don't know, for your listeners, if they have any entrepreneur friends or they are entrepreneurs, entrepreneurism is a little bit like a cult. It's like, once you start hanging out with entrepreneurs, they just want you to join. It's like, oh, it's so great. You don't understand it's just so like magnetic being around people with that kind of energy. And I started to get kind of seduced into the idea, like maybe I would want to try that. And he kept kind of sprinkling that energy into my life. And then, I just got to a kind of a boiling point with, some frustrations around big companies and thought, let me give it a shot. And here's one more thing. I read a book that talked about risk and fear. And it said very often we don't take action of something. We don't take some risk because of a fear, but that fear is not very specific. So it said, be very specific, like get out a piece of notebook paper and write down, like, if this goes wrong, what's the worst that's going to happen? And really get specific. And I hadn't really done that before because the idea of jumping out on my own seems so risky. Like, oh my gosh, I'm a single mom. I have 2 kids. They like to eat every single day. I don't know
Yeah.
how to make money. What if we're going to lose our house? We're going to be destitute and homeless. And when I sat down and really got specific about the fears, I thought the worst thing that could happen if I started a business is it would not be successful. And I'd
Mhm.
have to go get a job, maybe dig out of a little debt I might have built up in an unsuccessful entrepreneurial path. And then I would dig out of debt and everything would be fine. Like I could go get a job I didn't like very much and make money. And I already have one of those. So if that's the worst case scenario, it felt like not that big of a risk to jump out and give this a try.
Wow. You make it sound like, okay, yeah, it's just a thinking process. Let we go. And I'm
Well, I am an engineer, so I tend to view things through a pretty analytical or logical, like step by step way. But of course, it and everything since then has been a windy path. I mean, entrepreneur life is not like a straight line to success. I don't know anybody for whom that's been true. It's always windy.
Absolutely. Now, do you know the interesting thing you're talking about fear? When we actually left Belgium 11 years ago to come to America, and some of our friends were, oh, well, it's not that bad. You do this, you do that. And I realized one thing, and it's linked to fear and uncertainty. People will choose misery over uncertainty. And the number of people that I know that are miserable in whatever they do,
Yeah.
and basically are afraid to make a change. It's almost like a psychological case.
Yeah. And, certainly the corporate environment is a great environment for lots and lots of people. It wasn't for me. For and increasingly be felt more confining and more like almost like a mental straitjacket for me trying to make myself fit into that environment. But it took, it getting very, very, very painful before I finally made the leap. And I think that's, an evidence of what you're describing there is like if it had been just mediocre, I don't think I'd ever started a company, even though I love this life and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I would have been too afraid of the uncertainty of that. I'd have stuck around in a mediocre career forever. But by the time I finally quit, it had become a pretty miserable experience for me and all kinds of reasons for that. But it was the misery, like finally outweighed the fear and of the uncertain.
That's awesome. Congrats. That's really amazing. And
Thank
before we get into your company, the boost pricing. Sorry, I have one last question when it comes to corporate America and your role. So you
yeah.
were I was looking at your LinkedIn, ExxonMobil. You were pricing and senior pricing, and then you were pricing manager the company. And I'm thinking about my previous life owning an agency, a corporate events agency, and I'm thinking about all the people I know which are now trying to sell their services to corporate. And
Yeah.
I had two type of people that were buying in the company based on the pricing manager as well. I had the person who understood, sorry, the service, the fact that no, a price of a room is not the price of a room, and if you end up with the room overlooking the garbage or the overlooking the sea is different. And then I had another type of people that were buying services like they were buying supplies.
Mhm.
So what would be your advice for somebody who's trying to sell services specifically to corporate?
So I just want to make sure I'm understanding your question clearly because you're describing selling into a procurement, right? A
Correct.
procurement team. Okay. So
Correct.
in some procurement professionals and processes really have a place in them for understanding value, and others are much more transactional. Is that what you're kind of describing? Yeah. So
And also, what was your role with procurement? How were you advising procurement, and how would they taking your advice when it comes to
yeah.
selecting vendors?
So I was not involved in procurement at all. So, we were really around, so there's sort of, in a business, you have to buy stuff and you sell stuff and plenty of other things too. But the buying side and the procurement side, it was not my area. And I obviously have a lot of exposure to interaction with and sort of de facto expertise on procurement processes because sellers deal with them. But my
Yeah.
role in when I was the pricing manager and a pricing director was really to help our own internal sales teams sell more effectively to our customers, make better pricing decisions, handle price objections more effectively. But I still have something I can offer on that question, but it's really more from the perspective of having gone kind of against procurement, if you will, in a negotiating process rather than my role in advising any of that in my corporate roles.
Understood. And that's also, yeah, well, why don't we go there, and then we can obviously talk about the boost pricing, what you do. But that's really a question for me that has been all my life, business decision, because sometimes you want to win the business, but
Yeah.
then then what? You're winning the business, but you're not profitable, so you don't have a business ultimately.
That's right. So there's a few different things that I would weave together into an answer here. The first is to try as hard as you can in a selling process to understand that landscape. In other words, is there a way to pull on the value lever with this organization, or are they very transactional? And the more you have access to the people to ask them questions, to understand their buying process, to dig underneath, because even the folks, if your job is procurement, your job is to get the best thing you can get at the lowest price possible, right? Even in the organizations that do a better job of weaving value considerations into that process, still have the same goal: get the best thing they can get at the worst guy's price, right? And so they aren't going to, no matter what kind of procurement organization you're selling into, they're not going to just trot out all the pricing power and all the truth and lay it on the table and give it to you, right? There is kind of a game of cat and mouse going on here. I think pricing's a lot like poker, where everybody's bluffing, everybody's trying to look at their strength of their own hand and guess at the strength of their opponent's hand. And buyers are trying to hide how much they're willing to pay. Sellers are trying to hide how little they're willing to accept. And in my experience, most of the time, the buyer's the better poker player, not necessarily because they have the stronger hand to play, but because they're the better bluffer. And by that, I mean, if you are the seller and you are providing meeting services or event space or anything that any of your audience would be providing, they're going to buy that from someone. They're going to hire someone and they're going to rent that and they're going to buy that product or service from someone. Why not from you? Do you believe in what you sell? Do you deliver with excellence? Do you rep excellence from the very beginning of the process all the way through to the end? If you do, then you have a strong hand to play in that, in that poker game of pricing. You're not sitting on twos and threes, you have pocket aces. So to me, there's a few things here. First is the part I just said, which is do not enter that conversation from a place of inferiority or lack of power. Recognize that you're a peer at that table. That doesn't mean you can be arrogant or, just demand any price you want because you're great at what you do. You still have to play that poker game. But to walk in there afraid will cause you every time to underprice. So it's to recognize you have pricing power in the form of your excellent products and services. That's number one. Number two is to, and I'll circle back to where I started this, but kind of got distracted on the pricing power piece, is to try to understand your quote unquote opponent and understand their process and understand how much value is going to be part of their decision-making process. And sometimes this is borne out over, hey, we worked an event for these guys last year, or we have a client that knows them. And so there's a little bit of intelligence we can build up over time around that. And I would say we've got to not think of every single sales opportunity like it's just a transactional, all they care about is price. Even if they say it's transactional and all they care about is price, there's often more at the table. There's often more at stake. And I'll give you an example from my experience in corporate America, but I've also seen this and heard this a lot since I started this consulting company, which is procurement says, we've pre-qualified 7 vendors. They're all exactly the same. At this point, everybody can meet all our criteria. Lowest price is going to win the work. So please submit your best and final, right? And meanwhile, outside of procurement, there's somebody else in the business who cares about what you do. They care about the quality of what happens. They're not in procurement, but they're operations or they're HR or they're, who knows, whatever function that really cares about this. Those guys have the thumb on the scale a lot when it comes to the decision-making process. So even though, let's say you're not the cheapest, Eric, but you're somewhere in the middle, your price comes out somewhere in the middle. But that person in the operational role knows your work, knows your quality, knows your reliability, knows you are the lowest risk option for them because you never fail to deliver it. And then procurement, despite the fact that quote unquote everybody is the same, they're under no obligation to actually pick the lowest bidder. I've seen it lots of times. They pick somebody right out of the middle or even at the top because they're the right partner. But they use that environment of like a bid, almost like a bidding environment, to create fear and get people to undercut themselves. So
Hmm.
it's really like trying to look at, sort of widen the aperture outside of just this procurement conversation and understand that client as a whole. Who else in that organization can you build relationships with? Having them advocate on your behalf as much as possible. And recognizing not every opportunity is going to be like that. There are going to be times that you can't get access to anyone. You have to submit the bid online. You have to do it in this certain format. There is no, so there are times when you're going to run up against like, this is transactional. And then, and this leads me to my final point of the three, is it smart to even play the game? That reminds me of an old movie about war games. It's like the only winning move is not to play. Like sometimes when it comes to those very transactional, very aggressive procurement tactics, does it even make sense to win that work? Because to your point, if you win it and you're not making any money, you're not making any money. But the other thing is your organization is tied up. Your wear and tear on your people, wear and tear on your equipment, wear and tear on your life to not make any money. You're not reserving organizational capacity for those other customers that really do value. So it's a willingness to walk away from the wrong kind of opportunities.
I cannot help but smile at what you just said, and it remind me of a personal example. If I can share that, I was bidding for
Yeah.
so with my corporate event agency, I was bidding to win a lot of different conference for a pharmaceutical company. Lost the bid, and the argument given, I didn't buy it. There was something else, but I find out only 6 months later. But about a month later, on a Thursday, I was in Barcelona at this trade show called EIBTM, and I got a call from somebody in the team of that person asking me if I can make a bid for their sales meeting. I say, hold on, I just lost the big bid. I said, yes, but you're so well known for the type of event you're putting together. It's very important, blah, blah, blah. Can you make an offer? I said, okay, when do you need it by? And there was a blank on the phone, and then she went, tomorrow, close of business. I said, are you kidding me? I say, no, it's very serious. And I thought, you know what? Okay, I'll try. And I had two of my local partners, because I always work with local partners in the world, that were still available. That night I called them. Long story short, work all night, all day, came, won the business. And I charge a fee, which is the normal fee that I always charge for what we do. Fast forward, we had the most successful sales meeting they had the last 7 years based on the criteria that I measure. And I come back a few months later, like 2 months later, after the sales meeting, to talk about the one for the
The big
following year.
work, right?
And I'm back with the head of that department. And we talked, great, wonderful. And then he said, yeah, but your fee is too high. I said, excuse me? He said, your fee is too high. I said, listen, you came at the last minute. I played the game. I delivered amazing results. I didn't charge you more, even though it was like last minute. Now you're asking me to reduce my price. How am I supposed to do that? He said, well, it's a lot of people there. I said, okay, let's go this way. If I do that, I risk losing my company, because at the end of the day, I won't be profitable. So what do you want to do when you are working with people that might risk going belly up? Casey's answer was, well, in that case, I'll find another one on the internet.
Yeah.
And as soon as he said that, to your third point, I said, you know what? I'm done. I stood up, I said, thank you very much, shake his hand. He was like, what? You're not this? No, I'm done. I'm done. It's a question of appreciation, partnership. But anyway, I think that's very valid what you say. The challenge, especially it when you start your own business, the first clients, you want to have them badly. So let's take your example. When you start consulting, the very first clients that you have, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are in that case, what is your mindset? What do you do? Do you set yourself like a rock bottom? How do you operate in that case?
Yeah, it's one of the most common, and I'll speak in generality, and then I'll get specific to like how I did it. But in general, what I see, because we meet and work with companies in all different sort of stages of their life cycle. Some are still very early on in their days. Some have been around for 100 years, and everything in between. One of the most common mistakes I see new businesses make is underpricing out of the gate. And I'll say, I think there's a number of different reasons that companies do that, but it's some of the things we've been talking about, the fear, right? And it's like, I need every dollar. I've got, my family counting on me. Maybe you have some employees and their families counting on you, and you're trying to start this from nothing. And every dollar feels like, you got to fight and scrap for it. So letting any of that go, even if you know it's going to be tough business or not very profitable or tons of work, it's hard to walk away from bad business, really, for even for very mature companies, but especially in those early days. And I would be lying if I said I didn't make some of those mistakes myself. I think even though I'm an expert in this, quote unquote, you got to eat your own cooking. And there were times that it was like I mentioned, I was a single mom with two babies when I started this company. And so the idea of somebody's willing to hand me a check for some expertise I have, it's like I'm saying yes to that check, regardless of maybe that check should be twice as much, or even if the check is a nice size, but the work is the wrong work. And this
Mm.
is especially the case for any of your listeners that are in sort of a services, business. If it's not just product, rinse and repeat, if it's services, which obviously the event space it largely is, it's your knowledge, not your product, that people are willing to pay you for, and your relationships and your ability to organize things and your connections and all those things. It's so easy to undervalue and underprice that in the early days. And I want to tell a quick story after I kind of connect the dots here. The connecting the dots is anybody who starts a company, day one of the company is not day one of their expertise. Day one of their company is not day one of their mastery. They only can start a company because they've spent years or decades building mastery. And
Mhm.
so very often there's a lack of confidence at the beginning of a company, 0 to even up to maybe 5 years, I would say sometimes. So certainly the first couple of years, that like
Yes.
I have to get my foot in the door, or I'm not proven in the marketplace, so I have to be the cheapest because otherwise no one will give me a chance. But if you've got 20 or 30 years of expertise in an industry, or even 10 or 15 that is really, really lights out mastery, there is no reason to underprice that out of the gate. And my one story I want to tell about this, and I don't even know if it's a true story, but I love it. Pablo Picasso was sketching in a plaza once upon a time, and a woman recognized him and asked him to sketch her. And he says he will, dashes off this quick sketch, and she asks him if he'll sell it to her. And he says he will. And he quotes her price of 5,000 francs, which was this huge sum of money for that time in history. And she's shocked. In fact, she's outraged. And she says, "Sir, it only took you 5 minutes." And he says, "No, madam, it took me a lifetime." Why that's relevant for folks listening to this podcast is they're in the same boat.
Yeah.
They've fallen down and skinned their knee and gotten back up 1,000 times. Customer can bring some unsolvable problem to you, and you can take a look at this thing they're trying to accomplish, and in 5 minutes you see the best way to get it done. But the only reason you can do that in 5 minutes is you've done it 10,000 times before. And so that is my counsel to early days entrepreneurs, is they don't think of yourselves as new. You're not new. It's a different, incarnation, a different version of your expertise out in the world, but it's no less valuable. So don't underprice out of the gate. The other thing I will say about this, and this is particularly true again in services businesses, there's something called the price quality effect, which is where
Yeah. Sorry.
um,
The what?
the price quality effect,
Okay.
which is where we infer quality from pricing. It's expensive, it must be good. It's cheap, it must be garbage. That's why you'd never eat at a 99-cent all you can eat shrimp buffet, right? So when we are new as a business and not confident yet, and or hungry for our sales, and we underprice out of this well-intentioned but misguided attempt to get our foot in the door places, sometimes we're sending a signal to the marketplace that you're not very good. You must
Mhm.
not be a very good event company because your fees are ridiculously low, right? And so we can actually harm our perception of our quality and our value in the marketplace by being too cheap. And this is easy to say, hard to do, because people have families to feed, and
Yeah.
sometimes the checkbook is getting a little bit skinny. I know it's hard to sometimes do, but the more confidence you can have to stay in your lane, don't work with companies you shouldn't work with, don't take checks that are for work you can't do with excellence, and
Mhm.
then B, don't underprice what you can do with excellence. Those are the companies that embrace those two things, grow faster and are much more profitable much sooner than those that try to use price as a lever to get at the door open.
I love it. And actually, I had written down in March 23, you wrote a post and I highlight this sentence, are you charging your customers high enough prices to help them avoid the cost of poor quality from inferior competition? Which is absolutely brilliant. Now, you speaking about that, and I agree with you. Obviously, we have years of experience behind us. Who help you with your mindset when you start your company? And if it was me, I wouldn't start with that mindset when I started my first company. Did you have mentor? Did you read something? How did you come to be so convinced about that, and rightly so?
Well, so I had a little bit of a head start on this problem because I had been in the pricing space for a long time. And so already understood things like the price quality effect and the
Mm,
problem with underpricing around that. So I have maybe my pricing mindset and skill set was in a different starting point than many entrepreneurs because that's specifically my area of expertise. And yet that fear still creeps in. And I'll tell you, I've been in business now for 15 years and, gratefully, thriving and successful and profitable and happy to be so. But there's still fear sometimes. That still happens to me where I am telling someone a fee for a program that we're going to deliver for them. And maybe it's they have a much larger team than we have ever worked with before. So that fee is much larger. And there's still a moment of, my heart jumps up into my throat. I'm a truck driver's daughter from the wrong side of the tracks. You can take, it doesn't matter how many zeros are in my bank account. There's still a kind of a poor kid inside me a little bit. So there is the reason I mention that, and then I'll go back to the early days of my company and answer your question more directly. But the mindset, the fears, the self-limiting beliefs, the emotions, the habits, the attitudes that we are all, have from birth, frankly, and then developed over a lifetime of experiences, they show up in a sales conversation. They show up in a negotiation. It's not just some kind of, skill driven thing like say this, do this, follow this process, and you'll sell. I mean, that is true. Like these are helpful tools, these skills, like the scripts, the skills, the processes, all helpful. But at the end of the day, all of those can be sabotaged by self-limiting belief. And so we have to, if we want to be as profitable as possible, constantly be sort of interrogating what's behind the willingness to walk or not, what's behind the willingness to discount or not, what's behind the willingness to speak up and push back when somebody objects to our price or just cave. And it's usually a set of mindset limiters. And so it's just you can't do what you're not aware of. So it's like step one is shine a light on it, and then step two is act anyway. It's sort of that courage isn't the absence of fear; it's the ability to act in the face of fear. And I think that's what the way I kind of look at this around pricing. Specifically to me, when I was very early in my career, I had the good fortune of coming across a CEO peer group called Vistage, and I was
yep.
in a Vistage group, and nobody else in my Vistage group had pricing, was not a pricing business. Obviously, there's not a lot of us out there pricing businesses, but
No.
so there were all kinds of different companies in the room doing all kinds of different things, but having a very safe environment of trusted, peers and advisors to go to every month and say, here's what I'm struggling with. And some of, the struggles are mindset driven, some of them are skill set driven, some of them are hiring, some of them are financial, some of them are, you just have stuff when you're figuring it all out. And at the beginning, I was a solopreneur. So I was the web developer, I was the accountant, I was the janitor, I was I did all the things as a lot of early entrepreneurs do. And so my needs to get more skilled and more confident in my business were helped by that group because they had, a suggestion for me on how I could do something on my website or who I could contact about, outsourcing bookkeeping when I was ready to do that or whatever. So I'm a huge believer in peer groups. I think they're enormously valuable because entrepreneurship can be a really lonely business.
Absolutely. I can only agree with everything you said, and going back to the mindset, being aware of it, and working on it, and the peer groups. I'm a member of EO and different
Yeah.
groups, and what we do now together as well in this group.
Yep.
It's surround yourself with people. I would say that also not only have the experience that you don't have, but are givers,
That's
and
right.
and are like you are,
Yeah.
and like I am as well. But it's just being able to surround yourself with people helping you. When you talk about pricing, and I want to come back to the owner of a business owner in the meetings and event industry specifically, can you suggest a process and in different ways they can do it. I give you one example. I had one of the largest consulting firm in the world was one of my, and I find out that the best way for them and for me to price after the second or third project was to have a flat fee and a success fee of 3 levels based on upon criteria. But what is your suggestion for somebody that has a service business and specifically in our industry to go about defining the right pricing and selling the right pricing?
Yeah. So I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, some of the question is rooted in sort of the structure of the price. In other words, how do I structure that? Do
Correct.
I, like you described, the fee plus a success metric? There are other, there's lots of different ways to structure pricing. I will, of course, even within a specific industry, there are very many different pricing models that make sense. So this is a really somewhat of a tricky question to answer, but I would say whichever one meets the following criteria. In other words, what structure makes the most sense for you is going to have to meet the following criteria. It has to be easy to buy and sell. Sometimes I see companies come up with a value-based pricing structure that really does a nice job of reflecting the value of what they sell, but it's too complicated for them to explain. It's too complicated for customers to understand, and or customers are very used to buying this service this way. Everybody, like classic example, like attorneys. Everybody knows that's an hourly billing. Now there's firms moving away from that and trying to pull that towards a more value-based approach. But for 100 years or hundreds of years, people have been buying legal services by the hour, and that's what customers are used to. And so it is a massive pattern interrupt for you to drag an entire, not only just a customer, but maybe a whole industry to a whole new model. And so it doesn't mean it can't be done. Disruptive pricing models work, and they can be a source of incredible profitability and delight the customers because they're connected to value. But we do have to think about, when we're structuring our pricing, is it easy to buy and is it easy to sell? Doesn't mean it has to be the same as everyone else, but I have to be able to quickly and simply get my customer to understand why this model makes sense. The reason quickly and simply is important is nobody has enough time to sit down with us and understand our value prop in the full degree we wish they would. Very
Right.
often we have 20 minutes on a call with someone, or and here's the other piece. Increasingly, business decisions and buying decisions are not made by one person. They're made in some kind of committee fashion, right? So you may have a stakeholder inside an organization who's a champion for you. They love you. They love your work. They've worked with you before. If it were up to them, they would just write you a check and be done with it. But it's not just up to them. They got to go back and show it to their boss, and the CFO has to sign off of it, and procurement has to weigh in because it's over a certain price threshold. So now that person has to go sell you internally.
Right.
And if we have too complicated of a pricing structure, or our messaging isn't kind of quote unquote portable in the sense that we haven't armed that person to be an extension of our sales team, then we're giving them a tough job, because nobody's better at selling Eric's company services than Eric, or Casey's company services than Casey. And now you're putting that job of sales expertise in the hands of someone who's listened to you for half an hour and has a flyer, right? So the degree to which pricing is really easy to sell and easy to buy is really important. Let me pause there because I don't want to just monologue at you for 10 minutes. Any thoughts on that or questions on that before I share a couple other thoughts?
No, I honestly, I was listening to you and I was thinking, oh my God, this is probably one of the most valuable podcasts I've ever recorded. So
Thank you so much. It's fun to talk about this stuff. I love it. So it's got to be easy to sell and easy to buy. The other is it should scale with value. And so, without knowing the details of the one example you just laid out, it's like, it does scale with value. In other words, the better you are at your work, you make more money, and the client pays more, but that's okay because that pay more is commensurate with value more, right? And so it doesn't have to be that structure. There's other ways to structure scaling with value, but too often we have pricing structures that really aren't aligned in that way. And I would say, so it's got to be easy to sell, easy to buy. It should scale with value. And there was one more moment of silence from my memory while I think of it. Oh, I was one more thing. Don't be overly transparent. So this is a very big problem that I see in lots of industries, and I've definitely seen it in the meeting and event space, where it's like, say you're doing something, and this particular event is going to be $287,000, and you're going to get all these things with it. Do not put in your quote like, and then the forks are $4, and then and then the shrimp buffet is $19. Like, unless you absolutely have to, and I'll get to that in a second, but the degree to which we give infinite detail behind our pricing model It is not helping the decision process. Decision fatigue kicks in because there's 8 billion numbers on that proposal. But it also gives your customers all the power they need to come and beat you up. I think about this. If you were going to go buy a cake, let's say you're having you need to find a wedding baker, and you say, okay, I have 200 guests and I want raspberry filling and 2 tiers and blah, blah. And they come back and they tell you the price. And then you say, okay, good. Let me see your recipe. And they give you the recipe. And then you say, well, 3 dozen eggs, that's a lot of eggs. Could you do it with 2 dozen eggs? Like, they're not an expert in what it takes to bake a delicious cake. You're the expert in that. Don't let them in your kitchen. Don't give them your recipe card, because all of a sudden they'll start to try to pick apart your expertise in delivering the exceptional outcome they're looking for, and then take out something that's essential. It's like, you can take off, the sprinkles and the candles, but you can't take out the eggs and the sugar. It's not going to be a good cake, right? So I'm not suggesting give clients no opportunity to choose and modularize and maybe scale the offering for their needs and their budget, but make sure that they aren't the ones, you're not deputizing them to be an expert in your industry. You have to stay the expert, and you can curate some choices for them, but don't let them in this, like, in the back of house where they're suddenly, asking you if you can make a delicious cake with no sugar, because you can't. You can't.
Mm.
And I think, like, an example, and this is from a very different industry than yours or mine. In fact, it's a B2C retail model. But if you look at when you go buy cars, you don't go buy a car and select the 150 different options individually. There's like the basic trim package, the deluxe trim package, the XL, the SXL, whatever. And they've curated these sort of packages that they know, because they're the experts, not me, what all goes together. And it doesn't mean don't be flexible. This is another problem of early businesses. They can be anything to anybody. We'll do anything you want. And it's like, no, they're hiring you because you're the expert. They're not the expert. And so be willing to say, hey, I know you've got this idea of how this could work. In my experience, when it works like that, here's some of the pitfalls that can come up. I have a different suggestion I think is going to help you achieve the same thing. Can we talk that through? All of a sudden, you have gone from a peddler to a peer. You are not just hawking wares, you are solving problems. So
Absolutely.
the willingness to disagree and respectfully and diplomatically push back when somebody's trying to take the sugar out of the cake, unbelievably valuable.
Absolutely. And to your point, I was not assertive enough at the beginning when I launched my first business, until I realized that it was not helping me and it was not helping the client.
No.
But
So when you're doing work for them you don't even believe in, and they're not going to love it. It's going to be okay, but not spectacular.
Absolutely. I was smiling again because when you talk about, don't give too many details. I remember once we had a huge project. We're talking about 2 charter planes in different cities, 300 people and the rest. And one of the junior person in the team wanted to demonstrate that, they were good and they were responsible. And they asked the price of a flip chart. I'm not kidding. And honestly, the hotel was charging a ridiculous price for the flip chart, but and he ended up by flying the flip chart, putting in the cargo of the plane. So it ended up being extremely more expensive, of course, and then had an issue on the return because we're in another country with customs, with the flip chart and everything. And I mean, I was thinking about this example and say, don't be too transparent. In this case, I couldn't do anything else, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
became a
And
story.
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. It just said it became a story you tell later on. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say on that point, and I wanted to circle back to that. There are times that you get into, and this is generally a procurement driven reality, that there are companies of a certain size or with a certain level of rigidity around their procurement processes that, like, if you do not provide detail to the nth degree, you do not get to bid for the project. Like, you will either provide all of it or you are out. And so my advice is good advice, but sometimes you can't follow it if you want to participate and compete for certain kinds of business. So I recognize that there are times that even if you see the wisdom in the advice, that you can't follow it. What I will say, though, is customers will ask for a lot of detail. That doesn't mean they absolutely have to have it. There are times they absolutely have to have it, but they want it because they want the pricing power. Because again, regardless of whether we're talking about a procurement professional or someone else in the business, they still have the same job, which is try to get the best thing they can at the lowest price because they have plenty of other things to spend their budget on. So don't give them your pricing power by, giving them the recipe card unless absolutely necessary. And so when they say, I need the detail behind this, instead of just emailing over the detail, I would at least try hard not to get that detail. Say, hey, that isn't really how our pricing structure works. We don't do this bottom up from every single thing. Can you help me understand what you're looking for?
Right.
What information or what goal you have for having that information? So maybe there's a different way I can share, information with you that's going to allow you to achieve what you need to achieve without, doing that. Because that's just really not how our company works or how our pricing process works. And and then a lot of times and I'm making up that language. I would be able to do a better job if I had time to craft a perfect response. But the idea is to push that back diplomatically and respectfully and say, hey, we don't really generally provide that. Why do you need it? I'm going to say 50% of the requests disappear right then. Sometimes they'll come back and you'll go back and forth and you may find that you don't have to share that at all. And sometimes you may find that you do, but at least don't just jump in because they said they have to have it. That's often not the case. It's just part of their negotiation strategy.
To do that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One more thing to say on this topic of transparency, because your audience, I have to believe, because of the little bit that we know each other, is full of people that operate with a lot of integrity, right? They do what they say. They're very good partners to their customers. They will go to heroic lengths to solve problems, even if those problems were not created by them. If they were created by a client or a competitor who left a mess and they've rushed in and saved the day, right? Why I share that kind of backdrop of the kind of people listening to this podcast is when we are very high integrity people, we can confuse price transparency with good partnership. Like this, I just want them to have all the information they need to make a good decision. That's what good partnership looks like. I would tell you that transparency is not required for partnership, and opacity of pricing does not mean duplicity. Just because we don't share the recipe card doesn't mean we're doing something dirty or wrong or in, low integrity. We don't need to share every detail. We are still a great partner that's going to deliver exceptional products and services to them. So don't confuse transparency with partnership and don't confuse opacity with duplicity. I see that mistake a lot, especially in businesses that are very values driven, values forward, high integrity. It actually works against them in this case.
My goodness. Now I understand why your TEDx talk has more than 5 million views.
Thanks.
Oh, gosh. Casey, I would spend hours speaking with you, and I'm actually looking to do that. But the format of the podcast, it is what it is. For people that would love to have a Casey Brown next to them, what is available for them? How can they reach you? Can you tell us that?
Yes, for sure. So I write a blog. It's available on our website, boostpricing.com. That's out usually a couple times a month. I also make a lot of videos. I have a YouTube channel as well. So you can find that there. The other thing is everything, the blogs, videos, everything. I'm pushing a lot of content on LinkedIn. And so they can find me there. And I'm at LinkedIn, my name on the business. If you're trying to find me, as Casey Brown Boost is my handle on LinkedIn, and that's where I put a lot of content out. So certainly anybody who wants to connect with me, wants to learn more about what we do, there's a contact form on the website, but we have a lot of free resources that we're pushing out to the world because I'm a believer, if you're excellent at what you do, you got to be paid like you're excellent. And so I'm just trying to help the world get better at getting paid for their expertise and command the prices they truly deserve.
You've been so helpful. There's so many gems in this conversation. My last question, I'm going to return the favor. Okay. What is one of your dream, can be business related or not? What is something that you would like to achieve and that maybe somebody listening could help you with?
I want to speak at South by Southwest.
Okay, perfect. So anybody knows the organizers or how to get to speak at South by Southwest, or if you have spoken South by Southwest, please go ahead and help Casey, and I'm sure it's going to happen. Casey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in person in the near future.
Thank you so much, Eric.
Casey, thank you so much for sharing all those gems with me today. Absolutely amazing conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please follow me on LinkedIn or go to eventbusinessformula.com, where you will find a lot of resources. And if you learn anything today, please share this episode with your network. Thank you. Goodbye.